Hello everyone, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our revisited review of the BlackBerry Priv in 2018. So with the street price of the Priv, which you can find on Amazon or eBay, hovering around $110, I thought it'd be a good time to revisit this phone because now it's fallen into what I consider as budget territory for a no-contract unlocked device. The phone came out originally in 2015, so it's about 3 years old, but back then it came with fairly flagship specs, including a 5.4-inch curved AMOLED display, so in the same sense as the Samsung Galaxy Notes, but not quite as drastic when it comes to the bezels, but you can still see a little bit of curving on the edges, and also similar to the Xiaomi Mi Note 2 in that same sense. You can see again about the same overall dimensions as well. It makes the overall experience and design seem a little bit slicker, and there are a few edge gestures which we'll show you in the software later on. It also came with a Snapdragon 808 chipset, which is a hexa-core chipset, and it has 3 gigs of RAM and a 3,400 mAh capacity battery. The back also features a Schneider-Kreuznach lens with an 18 megapixel sensor size and a dual-tone LED flash. So this was BlackBerry's first foray into the world of Android smartphones, and here in 2018 they're still making phones running on Android. It was the transitioning between BBOS 10, which was an elegant but ill-fated OS because of apps not being supported as universally as Android and iOS, so this was a transitioning point for the Canadian company. And it was also one of the last devices that they made with custom in-house hardware, and it really was a flagship phone at that. Today we see a lot of BlackBerry phones on the market which are basically licensed from other Chinese OEMs in terms of hardware, and they're more of a mid-end, mid-segment phones compared to the Priv, which was really meant as a flagship on all ends. That also includes a slide-out keyboard, which is similar to the BlackBerry Torch in terms of the form factor, but is also improved upon in terms of giving us larger keys, as well as this really interesting touch sensitivity, which we also saw on the BlackBerry Passport. This is also a capacitive multi-touch trackpad, so you can do things like swipe up and down for different lists, for web browsing, without having to cover up the display, which is actually quite valuable. And if you're in a gallery, you can also pinch in and pinch out, and it supports those gestures as well. When you're typing, it can predict your word, and you can swipe up to complete a word as well. So there are quite a few smart features baked into this keyboard. More importantly, it's also very slim, even with a QWERTY keyboard. It's about the same slimness as you'll find as most other Android phones on the market, which is a testament to BlackBerry's engineering team and how hard they work to try and make the hardware as impressive as it was. The phone as a whole still looks beautiful. In fact, it's a striking looking design that in 2018 still fits right on in terms of looking professional, looking sleek, despite the fact that it doesn't have too much aluminum or metal construction going on. The curved glass as well as the subtle aluminum on the frame I think is enough, combined with the soft touch rubber, to make it feel like a very premium phone. Otherwise, on the very base here, there's access to a micro USB port for charging, a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. There's a front-facing speaker and mic. The side here features access to a power key, and on the other side, there's access to a volume rocker and kind of a classic BlackBerry key, which you can tap on once to allow you to mute the phone, as well as to bring up some quick shortcuts depending on how you program it. On board, we actually have Android 6.0 Marshmallow, and the overall experience is actually fairly stock, even though it's running on BlackBerry's launcher. And BlackBerry has built in quite a few security as well as services which take advantage of the keyboard for messaging, things like that have been imported over from BlackBerry OS 10. And the PRIV, for those who don't know, stands for privacy, and it stands for data privacy encryption, and that's one of the biggest selling points of BlackBerry phones in general, back even in the early days. It's really catered towards, let's say, professionals, it's catered towards businesses and institutions like governments that may issue this out just to encrypt all of their data on board, as opposed to another Android phone, which is technically more vulnerable to some of these software hijacks. And we see that with things like Detect by BlackBerry, which is basically a built-in security scanner that will try and go through all your apps as well as memory and just tell you if your security status is good or not. There's also BlackBerry Messenger, which is, again, a very secure messaging service that allows you to communicate with other BlackBerry users. And because BlackBerry has since migrated to Android, other Android users can also download BlackBerry Messenger and still chat with you that way. Otherwise, if we take a look at the overall kind of app interface here, again, very similar to what we see on stock devices these days. Slight tweaks in terms of how there are a few more sliding animations between the different pages, but the app list basically scrolls upwards and downwards vertically, and there's also a second panel for widgets as well as shortcuts, which BlackBerry has customized in terms of icons, but it's very coherent because it's all color-coded based on different categories. Like communication is yellow, calendar is always green, so you can understand at a very quick glance what everything is supposed to do. There's also a drag-down notification shade, which works very well just like on standard Android 6.0 or 7.0. Now, one of the more disappointing facets of the BlackBerry Priv when it was first released, and today as well, would probably be the pure performance. I say pure performance because the Snapdragon 808 is definitely not Qualcomm's best work. In fact, it was also found on the LG G4, which we did a throwback review on a few months ago, and the G4, as many of you guys may know, has a boot loop problem. It's also tied to the 808 overheating and having thermal throttling. In general, it's just not an excellent chipset for a relatively high-end, middle and mid-tier to flagship level SoC. Performance constantly gets overwhelmed, it gets too hot, and then we see all these stuttering and lag between what should have been a very smooth experience. And it's disappointing because if you compare this to, say, let's say a Snapdragon 801 phone or 805, an older device in fact, sometimes you get faster performance on that older phone in real day-to-day life, especially under heavy multitasking. So if we take a quick look at the camera performance first, again at 18 megapixels, at the time it was the best camera that BlackBerry had put into a smartphone, which was traditionally one of the weaker areas for Blackberries because they were so corporate and productivity centric and not very multimedia centric. And the Priv again tried to really change that with plenty of detail to zoom into because of that 18 megapixels, but you can see colors can sometimes fall a little bit flat. It's definitely not the most consistent camera in the world, but with auto HDR as well as some advanced filters and advanced pro modes that you can go through, you can definitely get better shots out of this camera. And for the German certified lens, I definitely would say I expected maybe a little more compared to what Carl Zeiss has on Nokia phones and what Huawei is doing with their Leica lens. I do think that out of the bunch, the Schneider-Kreuznach that BlackBerry used, again, probably wasn't the most optimized that they could have been. This is also a good time to mention that the display here is excellent. It's punchy, it's vibrant, not quite as good as Samsung's AMOLED panels, but really is a beautiful screen to look at with wide and generous viewing angles, a little bit of color shifting as usual with AMOLED. At extreme angles, the screen does have a slightly more bluish tint, but it's not too bad. A quick web browsing test using Chrome, we're going to load up the New York Times. Let's tap enter and we are going to try loading it using Wi-Fi. So this is the full desktop version of the site, and you can see here it's loading up actually rather quickly. There's not too much checkerboarding and scrolling, and everything still remains quite smooth on this 808 chipset, despite not being really the fastest or the newest processor on the market anymore. New York Times, of course, is a good benchmark because it's a very complex desktop page with lots of videos, lots of moving interactive elements like the scrollable section, as well as ads. So the fact that the phone can handle it well really is a good test of its web browsing capabilities. The screen is also plenty sharp, so at 2K, you're able to make out finer text and read out some of these articles even without zooming in or cropping in, which is actually quite impressive. Pausing the track there, takeaway is the audio quality is actually pretty good just because the speakers are facing towards you instead of pointing at the rear or on the side. Even though it's a mono speaker, not stereo, I found it to be adequate in terms of overall volume, as well as clarity, and even having a little bit of bass in the lower frequencies. So if you're just enjoying some quick YouTube videos or sharing some quick music with friends and family, I think that you'll be pleased with the speakers that are built onto the Priv. So what about elements unique to the PRIV in particular? Well, because it has this curved screen, there's this gesture that you can use from the edge of the display swiping inwards that gives you quick access to notifications in terms of reminders as well as calendar appointments as they roll along. You can also change this bar by swiping up and down. So instead of going at events, you can take a look at unread messages, including text, emails, things like that through the BlackBerry hub. And there's also tasks, so checklists that you create using the phone. And then down below here, you can also see your contacts. So you can go back and forth between these 4 quick notification panels. Other elements of the phone are pretty typical as far as an Android device, as well as running on the BlackBerry launcher. For instance, there's a slight customization to the multitasking tray, where if I tap on this, instead of showing it as just a deck of cards that you can flick up and down, it actually resizes these windows into different shapes, depending on, let's say, the particular app, as well as how often you've been using it in terms of going back and forth between these programs. So if I swipe away from these, you can see it dynamically changes the size of some of these. The home key also has some special tricks thanks to the BlackBerry launcher. Of course, we can still long hold to access the Google Assistant for voice searching, but I can also flick upwards to have access to a universal search, so I can go through all my apps and appointments simply just by typing away, which, by the way, again, the keyboard here really is excellent. It's super comfortable to use, and as suggestions pop up, you can just, again, flick upwards to basically say yes to that predictive suggestion as a quick gesture instead of typing out one at a time, which is actually pretty cool. And we can also flick upwards to access the BlackBerry hub. Otherwise, performance of the BlackBerry Priv, as aforementioned, is good, but it's not outstanding. Again, the 808 chipset in here, just like the LG G4, faces some thermal throttling issues, where if you are trying to bench it too hard with a lot of multitasking, with a lot of complex games, 3D titles, things like that, it does tend to run quite warm. Even though general navigation and performance is still going to be quite good, it's not going to be free from stuttering, especially after the phone runs a little hot after longer periods of usage. When it comes to battery life and performance, that's one area where the Priv is decent at, but it's not spectacular. The 3,400 milliamp hour pack will more than get you through the entire day, but it probably won't last you through a full second day of use unless you are trying to keep entertainment, watching videos, things like that to a minimum. That's just probably because of the larger screen, which is again at 2K in terms of resolution. And that brings us to another slight minor use of this curved display, which is it shows a status for charging always on the edges of the screen, and it will reach 100% when the entire screen is filled with this bar of light, which turns green. And it goes without saying, as a flagship that isn't too old, you're able to still run all the latest games and titles from the Play Store, whether it's more intensive 3D games or more light productivity tools. It's just you have to wait a few seconds longer for the apps to load. And even in the Play Store itself, as you're scrolling through longer lists, you may notice some occasional jumpiness and hesitation. So it's definitely not the fastest or most smoothest experience, which it never was, even at its time of its release. But now, after we've seen and been spoiled by, let's say, phones like the Google Pixel 2, going back to this as a retrospective, it definitely seems like it's not quite as quick. So that's more or less it for our revisited throwback review of the BlackBerry Priv here in 2018. Is this still a phone that you should consider picking up? Well, I would say probably not for most users, unless you are a big BlackBerry fan and you have to get the privacy features that BlackBerry has to offer, including the hub, as well as its array of security features built right onto the phone. But that comes at a sacrifice. The Priv did not come with a fingerprint scanner, which even back in 2016 was getting increasingly popular. Despite that omission, the phone itself has beautiful hardware. The design really is eye-catching, with that curved 2K AMOLED display on both sides, with a beautiful keyboard that really doesn't add too much bulk in terms of the size of the phone. It still is incredibly slim, and as a BlackBerry device, it definitely is one of the most multimedia-centric that we've seen yet, with a pretty good camera. In fact, one of the best for a BlackBerry phone, 18 megapixels, in addition to having a, again, very generous display, which is great for interacting with media, and of course a front-firing speaker, which is all very good. I would say that if you can get the Priv for maybe under $80, it could still be worth considering if you want a phone that is a good mix of both entertainment and productivity. So if you're someone who is constantly typing out messages, then having the comfort of a physical keyboard is going to be very valuable, especially as one of the only phones running on Android that you can find with such a great QWERTY keyboard. But if you're just a typical consumer and if all you do on your phone is really just making phone calls as well as gaming and watching videos, then there probably are better options on the market even at the same price point. In fact, a lot of the newer phones coming out now with the current crop of Snapdragon 600 series processors is already very capable. In fact, you'll find processors like the 625 are so energy efficient and so well optimized that they rarely get warm at all on all of the devices I've tested out so far. And so in real life usage, you may find that those phones can even get you a little faster performance. And if that's what you're looking for, combined with the best battery life, then again, those might be better choices. So you can check out more details about the PRIV in the links down below. But for now, this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. This has been the BlackBerry PRIV Revisited in 2018.